Welcome to the Beyond Barriers podcast. If you're an ambitious woman who wants to dominate your career, then you are in the right place. This podcast is co-hosted by Nikki Barua, digital innovator, serial entrepreneur, author, and speaker, and Monica Marquez, ex-Googler, diversity expert, and senior corporate leader. From inspiring stories to cutting-edge strategies, you'll learn how to develop the skill set, mindset, and tool set to get future-ready fast and accelerate your success.
Hi, I'm Nikki Barua, your host for today's episode. Have you ever felt like an outsider that didn't belong even after you earned a seat at the table? Our guest, Mallun Yen, has faced and successfully overcome this challenge over and over again in her career. She reveals how being an outsider fueled her creativity and helped her tap into the power of community to find breakthrough solutions. She was able to think outside the box because she didn't even know there was a box. Mallun is the founder and partner of Operator Collective, a $50 million venture fund that brings together senior operators from diverse backgrounds as limited partners. This is a group critical to a startup success, but largely absent from the historically white male venture industry. Mallun has successfully assembled a close-knit community of 130 incredibly talented Operator LPs who have built up the world's most admired companies like Zoom, Stripe, Salesforce, and Slack. And the best part is 90% of the LPs are women, and more than 40% of them are people of color. Prior to Operator Collective, Mallun was vice president at Cisco, founding team member at multiple category-creating startups, including RPX, that went from $0 to $100 million in IPO in just 3 years, and SaaStr, the world's largest B2B software community. In this episode, Mallun discusses why building powerful communities is the key to changing the status quo and what has helped her bring great people together for a common cause. She also shares her bold vision of an inclusive world where every dreamer and every doer can go beyond barriers. Visit IamBeyondBarriers.com, where you'll find show notes and links to all the resources in this episode, including the best way to get in touch with Mallun. Hi, Mallun. Welcome. It's so great to have you. I'm thrilled to have you on the show. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
So let's start off with your story. You have such an incredible story and an amazing career journey. So walk us through your journey, the highlights of, and specifically the experiences that shaped your career.
It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it. So I actually started my career as an intellectual property attorney, and today I'm an investor who has started her own fund. So it's a very unusual journey for sure. But I can tell you a little bit about how the pieces all come together. So when I was promoted to head of IP at Cisco, I was one of only seven women who had that position at major tech corporations. And so as a result of that, someone actually wrote a story, and it was a front page story in legal press that I had gotten this position because there were so few of us. And so as a result of that story, I realized hey, we actually don't all know each other, and there's only 7 of us. So we got together, and it started to be lunches and then dinners and things, and ended up becoming a nonprofit that has 5,000 members and 22 chapters around the world.
Wow.
Because there were so few of us. So you'll see a theme here, which is I'm a builder of communities, and oftentimes communities that don't exist for the people who are in that community. So in this, it was women in patent law. I mean, talk about niche communities. And it's grown to be broader than that. Now it's women in tech law and policy and the intersection there. And then while I was there at Cisco as the VP of Worldwide IP, helped start a company from the ground up that was a venture-backed startup that we took from 0 to 100 million in public in 3 years.
Wow.
But I was such an outsider to venture because I was, a patent attorney at Cisco, like the furthest thing possible from the startup world. And so I didn't realize how unusual it was until I started to spend more time within venture. Then the third thing, I'll circle back to that in a second. The third thing I helped build up on the side was an organization called SaaStr, which is the world's largest community for events and enterprise software and learning. and also investing. And so as a result of this, I started to spend more and more time with, actually what happened is we ended up taking the venture-backed company private again after 10 years from starting it. And as a result, I found myself for the first time in my life with a little extra time, which is as I transition out of my full-time job, as many of us have had transitions in our careers, which is what do I want to be doing? And what I really loved doing was spending time with startups and founders. And what I found was that a lot of startups and founders were seeking me out because it turns out that not that many of them had actually built up revenue from, the ground up to 300 million, which is where we were when we sold the company again and took it private. And a lot of them had not been in the enterprise. And the area that I invest in is all B2B and enterprise. And most B2B and enterprise companies want to eventually sell to enterprise because that's where you have a lot of the larger contracts and recurring revenue. And so as I started to meet with them more and more, I realized that, hey, I actually know a lot of things from having done this before that are valuable to these founders and also to other VCs, because the VCs would say, hey, can you meet with this company? And I would meet with them and I'd be like, this is great. But I very quickly realized that I don't scale, right? You can only meet with so many companies that you have. You can only advise so many companies. You can only angel invest because a lot of us don't have endless disposable income, right? To be able to, especially who are operators and not former founders, I can only invest in so many companies. But what I realized is there's an opportunity here because I love efficiency models and I love leveraging. How do you leverage sort of collective intelligence and create something that's even more powerful than if one person was doing it? So what I thought was, hey, what I know is that the venture world, because again, I always felt like an outsider because even though I was in a venture-backed startup that was very successful, it was in a niche area and it didn't approach it from, it's not like starting or Twitter, right? Or in the early days of Airbnb. This was patent risk management and insurance. Which is incredibly profitable.
That's incredibly sexy.
Yeah, I think it's sexy, but it's not like, hey, you started that patent risk reduction and insurance company, right? But what I realized was that I was it's still an outsider, even though I had been part of these successful companies. I was like, the venture world revolves around VCs and it revolves around startups and founders in particular. And I most identified as an enterprise operator and who had built and scaled up companies. And so I thought, hey, they all actually want to know people like me, but they don't know people like me because people like me don't hang out, at the happy hours or the Cloud 100 events, because a lot of us are, and because you also tend to know a lot of people like you, a lot of the enterprise operators I knew are women and people of color, and a lot of them have kids at home, and women are conditioned to be perfect at everything that we do. And so we give 150% to our day job. We give 150% to our family and friends. And if there's any time left over, like maybe you try to get a little bit of exercise, but like the last thing you want to do is like go to a 5 o'clock happy hour, right? Even when there were happy hours in the world. Yeah. And so as a result, because I always look at the cause behind things, because that's how you fundamentally shift things is by looking at the cause as opposed to dealing with the symptoms. And so when I looked at that, I said, you know what? The VCs and the founders actually want access to people with backgrounds like me, but they don't know us because our networks don't naturally intersect, and forcing matching doesn't work, just like forced diversity doesn't work. So I thought, hey, there's a way that we can fundamentally rebuild and create a venture fund from the ground up that brings efficiently those operators into the venture ecosystem in a way that's accessible and efficient for the founders to be able to access, meaning we would invest in them, and then also for the VCs to bring us in to co-invest. And so that is, and we can dig into that in a little bit of a detail in a moment, but that's fundamentally why I ended up taking all those different experiences and say, hey, why do I have a venture fund today? I had no burning desire to be a VC. I actually think that building companies is more interesting in terms of overall structure. And I still today have no desire to run a venture fund that's run like a traditional venture the way that we run this venture fund is the way you would run a company, which is it's based on teamwork. It's based on collaboration. Your typical venture fund, actually, your own partners you're in competition with.
Yes.
For deals, for markups. Nothing sounds worse to me. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to start something where I'm going to put myself in that situation, because one, I don't think it optimizes for success or performance. And two, like, how horrible is that? It doesn't sound like any fun at all. And then and there's some other themes about all my ulterior motives behind doing this as well. But that's basically the story about how an intellectual property attorney, patent attorney who focused on patents, ended up starting and raising a venture fund that so far so good. Knock on wood, it's all doing incredibly well. We're very privileged to have hit some really good timing and had some really great supporters from an early stage.
That's such a phenomenal story. But what the through line that comes through loud and clear in everything you described was you never let being an outsider hold you back from, pursuing a dream or taking on a big challenge, or, trying to find a really valuable way to solve a problem that was holding other people back. And as a builder of communities, leveraging the power of community to scale that solution. I mean, you've done that over and over again, but, I want to go back to the idea of being the outsider, being the only, perhaps in certain situations. What gave you the courage and the confidence to not let that be a stumbling block? Because for so many, it becomes an identity and a defining, limiting belief that says, I'm not like the rest. I don't know if I have permission. I don't know if I can do that. And you've broken all of those rules.
Let's just say I was a late bloomer because it took a long time to be comfortable with being an outsider and to realize that being an outsider is actually an asset. So even from the time, my parents are immigrants. They still don't speak much English. They live in an area in California where they don't have to speak much English, actually. And so I always felt like an outsider, even from an early stage. I'm sure you've been an only before. There were certainly times throughout from elementary school where I was the only one, and being called names and things like that as you're growing up. It's something that I think that many of us have dealt with, and frankly, many of us have dealt with things far, far worse than I have. And so from an early stage, I always wanted to be like assimilated. The only thing I wanted to do was be like everyone else, and so from the time, let's just start with being when I took the job as the first patent counsel hire at Cisco. Like, I'm the only one who was hired in that position who didn't have a technical degree, and I had known the person who was hiring, and so relationships are important, and people who will say, you don't have the typical background, but I'm going to hire you anyway because I think see
something in you.
Because there's something that's in you, and I try to do that too, and because so many people help me by saying, "Hey, you don't look like anything we've ever funded or hired before, but we think that you have something." So even from that time, which was I had gotten the offer, and then even the night before, I was like, "Oh my God, what am I doing?" Like, my job is now going to be 100% patents, whereas before it was only part of what I did. I'm like, I don't have a technical degree. I'm going to be I'm going to be reading patents all day, and I'm going to be doing all this. So the funny story is that I had that sort of, oh my God moment. And then my boss, who was a white male, who's super supportive, who I'd worked with before, actually had a little bit of that moment. He's like, oh my God, I get one hire and I just hire someone who's not technical. What happened was, and I've never actually told this story before, is that his wife was like, who knew me too. He's like, are you crazy? Like trust your gut. Like, and she's great. And it ended up being awesome. But even both of us were like, so you have to have confidence actually on both sides, which is he was the boss, but he had to have the confidence to say, hey, you don't look like anyone else, but I believe that you have something that is going to make you even more successful. And then me to say like, oh God, I don't have that background. Like, maybe I shouldn't do it. To say, you know what, if someone believes in you, you can do it and you can bring things. And then the other thing, that same boss would say to me regularly, hey, the reason why you're so good at this is because you think outside the box. Mm-hmm. And secretly inside, I would say, that's because he doesn't realize that I don't know enough to know what the box is.
I love
because like I didn't know that was how it was always done. And so for years, I actually felt like, God, I wish I had a technical degree. I wish I had this. I wish I had that. I wish I, had been part of a company that everyone had heard of. I wish I had done this. And then I started to realize somewhere along the way that the reason why I've been so successful in some of the things that I've done is precisely because I was an outsider and I didn't know what the confines of the box are. So it allows you to question, like, it allows you to think differently than what the traditional, someone who has been in that area their entire lives. And so it becomes a huge benefit, and it's incredibly freeing. It just took me a long time to realize that, hey, that's great. And so I love hiring people who don't, and bringing on people and interacting with people and funding people who, you need to know enough about an industry so that you're not just taking everything from scratch. But it's good to actually not be someone who is so entrenched in, oh, this is the way it's done, so this is how we have to do it. And so it becomes a big benefit. So that is something that took me a long time, though, to be comfortable with, because I so wanted to be like, to have the traditional background that everyone else had. And actually that comes to raising this fund, which is, when I started to raise this fund, it's a $50 million venture fund, which is very unusual for a first-time general partner who is a sole general partner, who has never been a general partner before, who didn't. I wished I had a lot of things, which is, God, as I was putting this together, I was like, oh, I wish I had a really long track record and I had invested early in Stripe and all these other companies, but I hadn't, because I was a patent attorney that was an operator in the enterprise who didn't really intersect with a lot of these startups. So I didn't have that. And so I was like, God, it would be easier to raise a fund. But then what that caused me to do was that this fund, I rebuilt it. It's a venture fund and legal structure, but I literally rebuilt it from the ground up to be different, and to leverage the fact that I don't have this traditional background. And if I actually tried to raise a fund that was just like every other fund, like, why would anyone fund me? I wouldn't fund me, because why would I be better at this than, your typical?
Because then the comparison is about, what the norm is and how
exactly
you norms.
And if I tried to do it the way that the norm was, I don't have the background that you typically need to make the normal model succeed. Beyond the fact that, like I said earlier, like, I didn't even like the normal model. It just didn't sound like very much fun. And so it's like, okay, let me rebuild this in a way that takes all of that I know and all my experiences, and let's rebuild it that way. And it'll be a whole lot more fun, because this is how I like to function. This is how I like to work. This is how women like to work with each other, et cetera. Anyway, so
I want to dig into that a little bit more, because for our listeners that may not know what a typical fund is and what makes yours different, can you illustrate with some specific things that show what the norm looks like and what's different and why that's valuable? Why, the way you're doing it is so important and so needed?
Yeah, great. So your typical venture fund is, your very traditional venture fund is, there's a general partner who is the one who raises the fund, who's the one who makes the decisions on what to invest in. So people give you millions of dollars. It's a big deal, and you go through a lot of diligence. And so you have investors in the fund that are called limited partners, and people call those LPs. So the general partners people call GP, and then the limited partners, who are the investors, are called LPs. Your typical LPs for some of these more traditional venture funds will be financial investors, like fund of funds. They might be universities, they might be endowments, they might be pension funds. And then oftentimes, but there's a handful of them, and people are very secret about it typically. They don't talk about who their LPs are, because actually, I don't know.
Almost like protecting the source of money.
It's sort of protecting the source of money, and those relationships are key to being able to raise a fund. So lots of times, even within an existing fund, those aren't even known to the other partners who maybe weren't part of raising the fund. Okay, so there's those, and then those traditional funds typically will have a handful of individuals. And those handful of individuals tend to be high net worth who were insiders because maybe it was a portfolio company, a company that you had invested in that had gone public. And now that CEO has some liquidity, and then they will give them the opportunity to invest in the fund as well. But it's a very select small group of insiders. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that I want to
clearly something that doesn't have a lot of diversity though.
Oh, I mean, especially in the area that I'm investing in, which is enterprise technology. Yeah. And so, 90%, I think it's gotten a little bit better, but 90% of VC check writers, people have the ability to write checks, are, male. And the majority of those are white males. And a large majority of those went to Harvard or Stanford. There's actually a study that went out on that. And so it tends to be this dominant homogenous group that is raising the money and then deciding what companies to invest in, and hence what companies are going to be successful or have the potential to be successful. And then when those companies are, the wealth recycles amongst the same group again and again and again. And so what I wanted to do as a result of this was, hey, there's a lot of really highly talented women and people of color who aren't part of this dominant homogenous group. If we could find a way to bring that natural network, because they have the skill sets and the backgrounds that I know these VCs and founders want, to be able to expand wealth creation. This is not about creating a separate ecosystem just for women and people of color. This is about combining these ecosystems and these networks that don't typically be able to intersect. So let me back up again for a second, which is back to your question. So your typical VC fund has a general partner or multiple general partners that raise the money, that decide what companies to invest in. And so the LPs invest in that. The LPs typically consist of, the big institutional investors, high net worth individuals, family offices, and maybe a handful of startup founders who had some successful exits. So what does that leave behind? Everyone else who doesn't have that high net worth and is in that little dominant homogenous group. And so what I wanted to do was, it's incredibly powerful to have people invest in something as opposed to just, for instance, like getting advisory shares or just volunteering or just being part of some community group, which is all great. But I was determined to find a way to harness all this incredible experience and talent of these mostly women and people of color and bring it together so we could work on something that would shift the power dynamic. And the way we're going to shift the power dynamic is by making money, but harnessing the collective intelligence of this group. And so what we did with this fund was that I knew I wanted to bring in operators who had backgrounds like mine, or even better than mine, who had built and scaled up these companies, and bring them together and make it accessible. And so I went to the people that so I know a lot of operators who had built up revenue who happen to be women or people of color. And so I said, hey, I'm thinking about putting together this fund. What do you think? But I need to make it accessible. It couldn't be that, hey, you have to put in $1 million. Most of us don't have $1 million to put in. And even for a lot of people, it's, for a lot of these funds, it's $250,000. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. Throw the gender pay equity gap in there.
Yeah.
We certainly don't have
to
money.
some degree, even risk aversion, perhaps, right? Of willingness to write a big check, even if you had the disposable income and the ability to invest, taking on that risk. Gender, I'm sure, plays a role in that as well. So how did you solve that?
Yeah. So that's a good point, by the way, on that point, which is, so Sally Krawcheck, who is the founder of Ellevest and was one of the few women CEOs in the financial services, says that people think that women are risk averse, and women are risk averse when they don't have access to the information. And because we're not, I say it's because we're not stupid. And I would put immigrants and others in that category too. And the other thing is we don't have the disposable income to just throw it away, to be like, I don't know, but you know what? You seem like a cool guy, so I'm going to put money in. You might do that to a good friend that but we really don't have the money to be like, oh, just, but I don't never see it. And a lot of the guys that I knew who do have that, they're like, I view angel investing as a community service. I expect never to see it again. Most of us don't have the luxury to do that. So anyway, that's just a side note, which is, and so what I wanted to do was make it accessible, which is I wanted more women to be investing, but I also didn't want women who have busy day jobs and are juggling a family to just invest the way that some of these guys who have a larger pocketbook than we do to invest, because losing money which is angel investing is the riskiest kind of investing, is losing money was not going to help the power dynamic, because we're really not going to help the power dynamic until we make money. The best way of investing is actually diversifying your portfolio. We all know you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but it's unreasonable for someone, because I've been a busy operator with a full-time job and kids, to say, okay, I'm going to invest in 20 companies this year. How could you possibly do the diligence? How could you possibly have the money to invest in 20 companies? But that's what you need to do to have, because maybe one of those is going to hit big. We think more of ours will hit big, but and so one is, I wanted women to be investing more. I wanted to give them a vehicle to make it easy for them to do so and to be able to diversify their risk. And then third, because we're all busy operators, it's like, you know what, there's not just one COO or one CRO who has the background. We have 18 of them, so that if you get busy, you don't need to engage, or someone in our portfolio or someone in our LP base is going to have that background that we need to properly diligence this company or help this company. And so that's what we did, which is, first of all, from a that's non-traditional, is our LP base is 136 operator LPs, which are people like me, or previously like me, which are active operators in the enterprise now. People who are building and scaling up these businesses. They include people like that have built and scaled out Salesforce and Google and LinkedIn and Stripe and Gusto and Intercom and other companies like that. And so, and instead of saying you have to put in $250,000 or $1 million, we created the sliding scale depending on how maybe underrepresented and how underpaid you might have been in the past. And so at the bottom end, it's $10,000.
Wow.
And it scales all the way up to, if you're part of the dominant homogenous group, you're in the $1 million+ number. And so it's not strictly done by gender or ethnicity. It's done based on what's the background that you have. It does tend to be that the people at the higher end are, part of the dominant homogenous group, and the ones who have had less opportunities or less access, tend to be at the lower end. And so that's one thing that we did, which is we made this accessible. And we also made it easy for them to participate, because the other thing is that women, and I'm generalizing here, I totally get it, we don't like to sign up for things if we don't think we can carry through with them. Because we don't like to disappoint people. And I actually think that's a positive trait. Very positive trait, as opposed to, just put my name on something, which also has its benefit, by the way. But this is something where I actually wanted people to participate. But because we don't want to disappoint people, I knew if I built this to say, Nikki, you have to spend 5 hours a month mentoring or doing diligence for us. You might be like, oh my God, I can't do that. Because I don't have, I'm barely juggling everything.
Schedule, so I can't commit now.
I can't commit. And so I can't do it. And I don't want to let you down because we're friends, et cetera, et cetera. And so I was like, Nikki, there's actually no minimum time commitment. You can spend as much time as you want or as little time as you want, depending on what you have going on in your personal and professional life. Because I know that, things get busy, and I know that you want to, right? But there's no pressure to do so. And so as a result of that, people spend more time because they know that, hey, if I need to pull back, because one of our LPs is Michelle Zatlin, who's the COO and co-founder of Cloudflare. She's incredibly active. And then when she was taking her company public, we left her alone, and she didn't need to be active, right, for whatever time period. Because fundamentally, what I also want for Michelle, and she's doing great, she doesn't really need my help on this, which is I want her to make her company and her own career as successful as possible. That's number one. Number two is, hey, look, on the side, we can be doing this and building this, because it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Because I think that's the other theme that I saw, and I certainly was guilty of this too, which is I would only focus on one thing. Whereas, and again, I'm generalizing, the guys all figure out how to do all these side gigs at the same time. And so I'm like, it's enough where we're only focusing on this because we feel like we have to be perfect on it. And then when we're done, we'll figure out what we want to do, which is kind of what I did. I'm like, I don't want everyone to have to go through, that process. Let's make it more efficient. Let's bring more women. Let's bring more people of color in. Let's make it more accessible, because a lot of it is just, it's just so foreign, and you don't know how to start. And so that's also what we did, which was we made it more accessible by dollars, but also in fundamental structure. And then third, which is what you do actually, Nikki, with your cohorts of coaching, which is women like community, right? We like to be able to combine things when we can, because we get a lot of energy out of connecting with other people and other women in particular.
But it also changes how we learn, because the social learning has deeper transformation and much more lasting impact.
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. And everyone, because we have people from all these different backgrounds, from product to engineering to CFOs to COOs to sales and marketing, when you bring that together, it creates a more powerful end result. And also because it's enjoyable, because a lot of women don't have this extra time to spend with each other, and we get to do this, but at the same time, we're learning from each other. And we also spend a fair amount of time also educating, just with programming and things like that. So those are sort of two fundamental ways that we've shifted this, which has made it accessible on multiple levels, both in terms of time, in terms of dollars. And built a lot of community around it.
Do you want to grow your impact as a change agent who ignites transformation in others, but you don't have a proven step-by-step method? Do you want to grow your visibility and influence as a thought leader to inspire others, but you don't know where to begin? The Beyond Barriers High Performance Executive Coach Certification is designed for experienced leaders who want to grow their impact and influence. Join this exclusive community of high achievers, advance your career as a leader, and experience the joy of helping others grow. Go to IamBeyondBarriers.com and register for the webinar to learn more.
Well, what's so powerful in the model you're describing is that you're really addressing multiple macro issues and with one seamless, cohesive solution. So one issue is, how do women gain more power, wealth, and influence? Right? The advancement to have that without, it doesn't matter how great your expertise or experience is. If you lack power, wealth, and influence, your ability to create impact is fundamentally limited, and you can compete in a world that's dominated by that. So you're facilitating that.
No, thank you. There's so many ulterior motives I have on this. When people say, how long have you been working on this fund? I say like 20 years, really all my life. But the point, that's a great point that you raised, because the other thing that I observed is that it's very hard for women to toot their own horn. We get viewed as like, oh, she's just self-serving. Whereas some members of a dominant homogenous group do it all the time, and it's accepted of like just normal. But when we do it, it's very hard to be like, look at me, look how awesome I just did this. I'm going to tweet about how great it doesn't go over well. And so I was like, what we're going to do is, I knew of all these biases that there are in the world. I'm like, you know what? So we're going to celebrate these women. So if you look at our website and our social media, it's like, we're saying like, look at Nikki, look at this amazing thing that she did, because it is very hard to do that on your own. But as you said, our ability to have power and influence and to get to the next, rung on the ladder is limited when no one knows what we've done. Because a lot of times, and I've been guilty of this, I did this for much of my career, which is, it's like, you're the quiet one in the background, building and building, fixing everything, taking on the extra work, and no one knows what you've done.
Right. I mean, it's one of the biggest things that holds careers back, is that we get stuck in these support roles that are important jobs to do, but they're not the most glamorous, not the most visible, that have the fast track to more powerful positions. And so you're being a good soldier, you're doing everything, but you're not helping drive your own career forward. So a big part of what your platform provides is that fast track to not only power and influence and powerful networks, but also wealth creation, which also is, in many ways, limited. The distribution of getting access to opportunities for wealth creation is not easily accessible. So by making that accessible, you're changing the dynamic there. But what's also interesting to me, as an entrepreneur myself, like what you're describing completely resonates with me, because I'm the typical visionary founder, but I'm keenly aware that my success depends on a great operator. And yet my circles don't intersect with many operators. And, you pointed out something that frankly makes or breaks companies. Any founder who has been through the journey knows that ultimately, if you can't solve for that, you have no real future. It doesn't matter if you have a great product. you need great operators and founders to come together, and bringing that collective together is also incredibly powerful. And the third piece is just the diversity equation that you're solving for and investing in diverse founders, but also bringing diversity of investors. My gosh, that's a big master plan.
Yeah, no, you have recognized when I mentioned earlier, all the ulterior motives I have for this fund, because I've tried to solve this problem in multiple ways, including my first company, which was a nonprofit called CHIPS, which was, the women in patent law. I thought that because women in patent law, there were very few women who were at the top, who were running patent organizations, but we actually all controlled a lot of corporate spend. One of my co-founders was the head of patents and is still the chief litigation officer at Apple. I mean, they have a huge budget. And we were tired of getting pitched by the same groups of homogenous teams again and again. And so what we actually thought when we started it was that, hey, it's that we just don't know each other. If we could get to know each other, then business is going to happen and it'll go from there. But what happened was we threw these events and learned a lot from them, and everyone loved these events. They were people were in tears, right? I mean, I'm sure you've been to events where it's like, okay, I've never been in a room with all these people like me before. And it's incredibly emotional and it's great. And people kept in touch. People would go on vacation together. People would trade maternity clothes, et cetera. And then, but there was something that was bothering me about it, which is business wasn't happening. And it was so annoying to me because I'm like, great, it's fine. I made all these friends and I love these friends of mine, but the guys all figure out how to do deals with their buddies. It's like second nature. And I'm totally generalizing, I get this, but it's almost second nature. It's like if you're buddies with someone, you're probably going to do business with them if there's some way it intersects. And it wasn't second nature. So I actually wrote this piece that started a lot of the concrete parts of actually this fund coming together and my determination. It's like, I'm going to do something because we're trying to make the way that women like to intersect and act fit into the rigid corporate structure, right? Into the rigid venture world. But it's not natural for us. It's not how we like to interact. It's not natural for us. It's not accessible to us. So that's why I fundamentally rebuild this to make it easy to take advantage of all that's wonderful about female friendships and community, and saying we're going to turn that into a benefit. And so and then we're going to harness that. And the stronger our community is, the better investors we're going to be. And so that's what I did. In fact, how
do you get past that common objection or concern that, well, I love my female friends, but I don't want to ask them for help and make them feel like I'm using them, or, I don't want to bring transaction into a friendship. Men do it all the time. How do you help them get past that?
So there's this piece that I wrote in Fortune that was published in August 2018, and it's called Women's Friendships. Actually, it's called, they actually I didn't quite know what the title they were putting on. They put it on How Friendship Holds Women Back in Their Careers and What They Can Do About It. So when I first thought, I'm like, oh, everyone's going to think I'm trashing women's friendships. And I was actually a little bit hesitant because I actually wrote this piece for like a year and sat on it because I'm like, oh, I don't know if I want to say this. Because, but I actually heard almost no negative comment, which is like, this is the elephant in the room. Thank you for talking about this. Yes. So on two ends, which is, I was trying to figure out why, despite like all this power with like female empowerment and friendships and stuff, why there was this thing that was holding women back from turning that into business. And so so I interviewed a lot of people, and what women were telling me was when they asked for a friend for business, just like you just said, they feared it would damage their personal relationship. And when they did ask and got a no, and sometimes it was yes, but oftentimes it was a no, they took it personally too. It's like, oh my God, I knew I shouldn't have asked, right? It's like now I've like ruined our relationship and our friendship.
Now they're always going to think badly about me for the rest of our lives.
Yes. It's like, they're always going to, and then you become gun shy about asking again. Because you're like, oh my God, I finally worked up the courage to do it. And they said no, and now they're going to hate me, or they're going to think that this is all I wanted. And so and sometimes people would ask and they'd actually get no response.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so it's actually, they weren't wrong. The women who said like, hey, I've damaged my relationship or whatever, because on the other side, women who received and asked for a friend, because I also asked them, like, have people been pitching you? What is your response? It was too unexpected. Like the women didn't expect that the friends to hit them up for business because it's not second nature the way it is with men. And then when they did have to say no, it did create this tension. And some of them actually even did start doubting, like, well, were we friends? Like, did you do this because you wanted my business, or did you want to be friends with me truly? And so the baggage is actually real on both sides. And so I looked at, well, what are the reasons behind this, and talked to men. And one example they gave me was, well, what I found was that women's friendship, when you get to know women, mm-hmm. and you meet someone at a conference or otherwise, you tend to go very personal very quickly.
Yes.
Which is like, we had a chance to talk a little bit this morning. It's like, we know about your marriage. We know about how you met, right? We know about kids. We know about the dogs. We know about, a sick family member, all in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to the men, and we know this, but I actually went through an interview, and he's like, well, the conversation I have with a guy the first time I meet him is pretty much the same conversation I have 25 years later. So when you're trying to bridge between intensely personal mm-hmm. to business, you can't make that jump abruptly. You have to bridge. And so I talk a little bit about this in the op-ed that I wrote, and I won't go into all of it now. Mm-hmm. Whereas the men are close to being a transactional relationship in the first place. And so that's why when I started Operator Collective, I'm like, I'm going to take the fact that I'm not going to tell women to be more transactional. What I'm going to do is meet somewhere in the middle, which is what's so wonderful about knowing all those personal things and celebrating people's personal successes and knowing about their kids. Is to say that's going to be part of what makes us successful. And so that article led me to say, okay, I'm going to create something that is going to I'm going to find a way to harness all of that incredible talent, but make it easy and comfortable for women, mostly women, to come together. And then that's going to be a benefit, because when we do, because I've always thought, you may have thought this too, which is like, God, I have so many amazing badass friends. If we all just started a company together, like
it's like designing your dream team and saying, who would I go, on this big mission with, and if I could bring them together.
Yeah. And then also because I've started a number of companies, I knew that not everyone could quit their job, right, and do this together. I'm like, I'm going to put together this fund. This is what it's going to look like. This is what I think. And then I talked to a lot of these women. I'm like, why aren't you investing? Why aren't you doing this, et cetera? And so I'm like, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm also built a lot of companies and businesses and products at this point. So I'm very meticulous and maniacal about like, what's the gap in the market? What's the product market fit? So I built this the way you would build any product or new business, which was literally like, okay, where's the gap? What's this? How do you create this? Because at the end of the day too, it's not about just bringing women and people of color together to do something that's fun and whatever. We have to make money.
Yes.
Like this fund, number one, is that we need to generate phenomenal returns so that we can shift the power dynamic in this world. And so these women and people of color and others who don't have a lot of maybe disposable income can continue to invest, can leave their companies and go start new companies. And so I knew I needed to build a business model that on its own was just sound, but it was going to be made stronger by the fact that we had all these people from diverse backgrounds who typically don't have the ability to participate in the venture world.
I think the other advantage, I'm sure, for the companies that you invest in is that they're getting so much more than just capital. I mean, just the sheer intellectual power of this collective in terms of advising and the growth of this companies alone has got to be tremendously valuable.
Yeah, no. And that's what I also wanted, because so what I wanted was, because we love doing that, right? We love, I mean, how many free coffees do you give? I mean, maybe not as much anymore because we're in a pandemic, but how many like free coffees do you give?
Oh, so much in terms of just mentoring and guiding. Anyone with experience just gets tapped into for that.
Yeah, and especially being a woman of color,
Yes.
right? There are only so many of, out there. And you always want to say yes, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm sure a lot of people did that for you. And
I've heard the term minority tax, that we have to pay because you're the only, and it's hard to say no. So you are carrying the burden of contribution in addition to also excelling in what you do because you're paving the way forward.
Yeah. And it's hard to say no because you want to. And so, but what I'm saying, I'm not saying that you should not give any more free coffees out, but what we're going to do is turn those free coffees into making the people in this community more successful, which is because the more that the women who are investors in this fund are successful, the more successful this community in this fund is. So there's no competition. It is about celebrating and helping make everyone else successful. And then also a lot of those coffees will channel into the companies we've invested in. And so it's not just another free coffee that somehow the guys figure out a way to turn into some deal
or another social chat.
Another social chat. It's actually, we're doing something. And actually I find that actually that forms stronger personal relationships. And also there's a difference when you start a relationship as purely personal and then try to turn it into business. But when you start it with personal and business together, it actually is much more natural to continue to have the business part of it. So a lot of the women and men actually in the fund, a lot of them I didn't know before. And so, but I know both professionally what they're doing and, ask them for intros for our portfolio companies or help with this. But at the same time, I know about their kids and their families and their vacations and what their career aspirations are. And are they looking for a board seat? And so again, I wanted to shift the playing field. So it wasn't us trying to fit into that rigid construct, but to say, we're going to make it more natural because I know this is how women and others naturally like to intersect, but let's do this in a way so that business doesn't feel jarring. That when I ask you for something, it's not like, I thought I was in this because we were friends. It's like, of course, because you know what? We're going to do this and we're going to make money together.
Yeah. I love that. I love the apps, but I think the core part of what you're facilitating is the bridge, from the personal to the transactional. I think, that's really encapsulates the challenge that most women face is they don't know how to bridge and the leap feels too harsh and too abrupt.
Exactly.
To the relationship. I want to get into a little bit about building powerful communities. You have done that extraordinarily well. You're truly a builder of communities. I've been fortunate to be part of some of those communities. I've seen the magic that you've created. A lot of women struggle with approaching someone that they don't know, right? So your inner circle, perhaps your immediate community, you might know, but expanding beyond that, getting proximity to more powerful relationships. There's a fear and hesitation of, again, rejection or dismissal. What advice would you give for someone who knows that they need to expand and build their communities? And it's not just it's more importantly to give and learn. How does someone do that?
So, so there's building communities and there's also building your own personal relationships. And I don't know if there's one you want me to more focus on.
Let's talk about just expanding your own personal networks, for the sake of advancement.
Yeah. So when I was at Cisco, Cisco was great, by the way. Working for big companies is I think a huge benefit. You get so much training and that you just don't get in a startup, which is and startups are wonderful too. I love startups. But if you are in a big company or you're thinking about going into a big company, I actually think that it's a great thing to do as part of your career because you will get more training and more guidance and more structure that will. So I got a lot of training. When I was going through it, I'm like, oh my God, I can't ever get my work done, right? I can remember this management training and this speaking training and things like that. And so and Cisco was very much a feedback culture. So I get a lot of feedback, like good and bad. But now I embrace it all, even though sometimes I wanted to hide from the feedback. And so one of the pieces of feedback I got was, so this also goes back to, you get a lot of advice where you might initially say, oh, well, that doesn't make any sense, or you dismiss it. So one piece of advice I got from someone was, you should be more political. And I was like, ew, like who wants to be political? Like, I don't want to be political. Like, that's not genuine. But when someone says something, maybe they don't say it in a way that there's always a deeper meaning behind it. Mm-hmm. And so I thought about it for a long time, and it took me a while to realize what he meant. And what I should have actually done earlier was that you should be more deliberate about relationship building. Because what happened is, again, like a lot of women and maybe people of color and immigrants and others, I was so heads down doing my work all the time and just like trying to crank and do a good job. And so the people that I happened to work with like knew me and I was well regarded, but I never deliberately tried to like continue a relationship with them or be like, oh gosh, it'd be great to work on a project with that person, because it was just literally whatever came my way, I would crank through. And if you happen to know me, then you happen to know me. But I wasn't deliberate about like, hey, I would love to work with Jay Shree more. And let's look for a way. But then there's a balance too, because it's not just like, hey, can you have a coffee? Because I've had people who have said, hey, can you have a coffee? And those sometimes get painful when there's actually not a purpose for the coffee. And so tie it to something that is meaningful and helpful to that very, very busy person that you're asking for a coffee from or whatever, or look for a way to work on a project together. So I think that helps. So that's one piece, which was be more deliberate about relationship building and solidify and keep in touch with those people. But don't do it in a way that just is wasting time either, because there are certain if you're an Asian woman who was rising up the ranks, a lot of times they would get put with me, right? Just, I mean, they just would. And I was happy to meet with them. And after the first coffee, sometimes I got to admit, they were a little bit painful, because if there was nothing that we were working on, we kind of ran out of things to talk about.
Yeah. And
I can't help, because I can't then say, hey, I'm going to recommend you for this board position or this advisory position or this, because I've actually never worked with you on anything. Like, yeah, she's pleasant to have coffee with. And so look for ways of working on committees. Is it a nonprofit? Is it organizing a conference? Is it, hosting podcasts, right? Is it, hey, I'm thinking about doing this, or can I help you with X? And a lot of times it is stuff outside of your normal job. But I think sometimes we focus too much of being perfect at just our normal job, because we're trying to be perfect at it, is to look for opportunities to do that, to build relationships. So I wish I had done that earlier. I do know a lot of people, but I probably would know twice as many people that I had strong relationships with had I actually been deliberate, as opposed to just keeping my head down.
Yeah, it's almost, realizing that you have two jobs, the job you're doing and building a career at the same time, which requires building alliances and getting mentors and sponsors and advocates for you.
Yeah. And then the other thing is I always thought that networking was a bad word. And in fact, just hated the word and didn't like even using it, because I also thought it was like, I don't know, like schmoozy, right? And so I still don't really like the word. I use relationship building, but I'm not against the word anymore. But when you look at it, there's something to learn, and there's something that you can contribute to everyone that you're interacting with. So it's not just networking or just like meeting people or whatever. It's actually, there's give and take. So very junior people who are earlier in their career, who meet with me, who have something to offer, I learn just as much from them. And those are the people that I end up building relationships with, or, hey, I've got this project. Do you want to do it? Because also out of sight, out of mind, they're busy. So I would say that, just also when you're doing that, it's not just networking for the sake of networking, is you're learning something, and there may be something that you can mutually contribute to each other. And that's valuable on both sides.
Absolutely. And that's what builds for more lasting relationships as well. Well, Mallun, you have shared so much wisdom and with such a powerful, experience with so many people to learn from. When you look forward into the future, you are such a visionary on a mission to build a better world. What's your biggest dream looking forward? What's your biggest hope?
So I hope that the world becomes such that, and I mentioned this before, that to be successful, you don't have to shift into the traditional construct of what the corporate world is, but that the world can be a little kinder and gentler, and show that you can treat people well. You can put culture first. You can build relationships and still build ultra successful companies. So we're fortunate that one of the LPs in our fund is the founder and CEO of Zoom, which, and also the CFO, who happens to be a woman, and the CMO, who happens to be a woman, and also the first investor in Zoom are all part of the fund. And so that's what we look at, which is, can you treat people well? Can you do the right thing and still build an ultra successful company? I mean, Eric and Zoom, what they did when the pandemic first hit is they just said, I don't care. We're going to give it all away to schools for free right now, because everyone's just trying to figure it out. And they treat people well. They treat people with respect. And he's always tried to do the right thing. And so that's what we're trying to do, which is we're trying to fundamentally shift the tech industry from the ground up by not waiting until they're a 1,000-person company or a 5,000-person company or even a 200-person company, but to say, we're going to fund those founders who are humble, lifelong learners who believe that culture, diversity, and operational excellence are a key part of building truly great companies. So founders from all backgrounds. And then as we invest in these companies, we bring our natural networks as they need to make hires, because we tend to know people. You tend to know people like you. And slowly what we're going to do is from the ground up, build these companies that are stronger because of the fact that you're not hiring just the same people. And then as that generates more wealth for the investors, for the people in the companies, that becomes a new norm as opposed to what sometimes happens today.
That clarity that you have, it's so visual and visceral when you describe it, like, what it needs to look like and how to get there. It's truly inspiring. So thank you for sharing all of that with us. And I'm sure everyone, watching or listening to this episode is going to be rooting for that vision to come to life, because we need change agents and change makers, and you are definitely one of them. So thanks for being on the show. It's been an absolute delight having you.
Thank you so much for having me. You're incredible. And you're an inspiration to so many of us. So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Barriers podcast. There are thousands of podcasts out there, and we are so grateful that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you enjoyed the show, please tell a friend about it and subscribe to get new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Visit iambeyondbarriers.com, where you'll find show notes and links to all resources for each show, including the best way to connect with our guests. See you next episode.